is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
As Chinese President Xi Jinping continues his visit to Kazakhstan, we'll be looking at his call for a comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Kazakhstan. And as ride-hailing app Uber faces fierce criticism in London in the aftermath of the latest terror attack, we'll be looking at its business model that some are demanding to radically change. Welcome to The Point. I'm Pan Dong, sitting in for Liu Xin. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Kazakhstan for his state visit to the country. This is Xi Jinping's first visit to Central Asia this year. Xi Jinping has met with his Kazakh counterpart, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and will also attend the 17th meeting of the Heads of State Council of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. His schedule also includes visits to the World Expo in Astana. The year 2017 also marks the 25th anniversary of diplomatic ties between China and Kazakhstan. President Xi Jinping has called for a comprehensive strategic partnership between the two sides. So what kind of strategies will the partnership bring to the economy of the region? I'm pleased to be joined from the UK by Professor Elena Kalichnova, Director of the Center for Euro-Asia Studies in the University of Reading, and in our Beijing studio, Professor Zhang Jianping, a senior researcher at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, MOFCOM. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with you, Professor Zhang. There is so much significance to President Xi Jinping's visit to Astana this time. This is in spite of Xi Jinping and the Kazakh president meeting with each other often over the years. If my math is correct, this is the 16th time they met. Why is that?
You know that actually Kazakhstan and China has a very important strategic partner relationship. Meanwhile, in recent 2 decades, actually, China and Kazakhstan are relying each other, on economic perspective. China imported so lot of resources, oil and gas from Kazakhstan. Also, Kazakhstan imported so lot of China's goods. Especially, I like to say that today, Kazakhstan provided their Belt Road Initiative. From Chinese side, we have the Belt and Road Initiative. Two initiatives will be connected to each other. Another important thing is that in recent years, actually, in 2013, President Xi first time provided, the Silk Road economic belt concept in Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstan definitely is a very important Central Asia country. Its area is the biggest one. Meanwhile, its competitiveness also is the highest one in Central Asia. More importantly, Kazakhstan is located on the, from China to European countries. Kazakhstan is located in the economic corridor of, Central Asia and West Asia. So I think that's why in recent years between China and Kazakhstan, those leaders in two countries met so lot of time.
Right, Professor Zhang, you touched upon many important issues regarding our topic. But now let's take a little bit more focus on Kazakhstan. And Professor Kalichnova, Kazakhstan is the first overseas pit stop along the economic belt of the new Eurasian Continental Bridge rolled out in the Belt and Roads Initiative, as Professor Zhang just mentioned there. I took a look and I have some figures there. More than 1,200 Europe-bound China Railway Express trains transit through Kazakhstan, and rail freight is also rising amazingly. It handled by Chinese railways reached 8.2 million tons, and the number of freight containers more than doubled. Additionally, 8% of the value of trade between China and Europe, which is expected to reach 800 billion in the year 2020. Can the Kazakh infrastructure deal with this influx of infrastructure and logistics?
Right. I think that, what we need to mention, first of all, is the Belt Road Initiative and the relations between Kazakhstan and China in this project. From my point of view, it's obviously these two countries, they complement each other in this great project. But this great project is about infrastructure. And unlike any other Belt Road Initiative nations, Kazakhstan is strategically positioned to be Chinese portal to Europe. And if we look at the geography, it's from the border at Kyrgyz to Kazakhstan Western Caspian shore in the energy epicenter of Aktau. And Aktau was originally the mining center, uranium mining center during the Soviet time, and now it's a core of Kazakhstan oil industry. A series of pipelines, railways, and freights will not only link Aktau, Kazakhstan to Kyrgyz, but it also will provide the links to Russia in the north, to Iran in the south, and to Azerbaijan and Turkey in Europe, across the Caspian to the west. Another very important point we need to remember that Kazakhstan was an early adopter of Belt Road Initiative since the country had legacy of supporting similar integration process. If we look at the history, since 1991, then President Nazarbayev was elected as the first president of the country, he was the main person who was proclaimed the formation of common of independent states, a successor of the Soviet Union in 1991. And Nazarbayev later, in 1994, called for the integration and revitalizing Central Asia through the Eurasian integration. So Kazakhstan has a lot in terms of the international cooperation to offer for this project. And obviously, the driving force of this Belt Road Initiative would be China, together with Kazakhstani participation.
Right, Professor Zhang, earlier you described the economic ties between China and Kazakhstan as relying on each other. But now I got a figure for you. Chinese investment to Kazakhstan so far has amounted to over $42.8 billion US. It's a very large number. So we have to talk about the structure problem. Do you think this kind of investment or the two-way trade there is actually balanced?
Yeah, actually now China imported a lot of resources and energy products from Kazakhstan and mainly exported those manufactured products from China to Kazakhstan. So generally speaking, the trade is quite balanced. But we think that between two sides, there are still very big trade potential to explore. For example, in this year, you can find that between two trade volume actually booming, increased 45%. I think that behind that, that's relying on China's investment booming in Kazakhstan. Actually, in my mind, in the first decades of this century, China's investment in Kazakhstan mainly concentrated in pipeline construction and energy and resources sectors. But in recent years, especially after the Belt and Road Initiative provided, and China's investment in Kazakhstan mainly concentrated, industrial capacity cooperation, including those iron and steel plants, cements, and other those, heavy industrial sectors. I think that from Kazakhstan, they want to, restructure Kazakhstan's economy, and then they hope to promote, industrialization and infrastructure improvement. On this regard, from Chinese side, provided so strong supply capacity, and then two sides economic relations becomes closer and closer.
Well, Professor Kalichnova, we mentioned this amazing number, $42.8 billion Chinese investment to Kazakhstan. So naturally, there are some concerns of a Chinese use of Kazakhstan's land and ports, and it has gained some momentum nowadays. What's your take on this kind of concern?
I don't think that we should have any concerns, because the main policy of Kazakhstan to move from resource richness dependency to the greater diversification. The problem is that if we don't have any international connections and links, we are very unlikely to become a competitive nation in this case. So, for example, you mentioned all these figures, but what is quite important to understand that they are spread evenly in different projects. They are not only in oil and gas. They are not only in a particular sector of the economy, but for example, if we talk about infrastructure, it's increasing the capacities of international border, for example, crossing the Styk, Alashanko or Alahol Khargos links, and create a railway connections to the Altai and Tanchenk counties. That all will provide a better international logistics zones, which Kazakhstan at the moment is missing. If we take agriculture sector, for example, Kazakhstan and China intend to modernize infrastructure on Bakhit-Pakio border checkpoint, which will again will give an opportunity to better international trade in terms of agriculture. An interesting project in agriculture is the project when the government are working to increase the quotas of Kazakhstan grain supply to China, and strengthening investment cooperation with the Chinese Committee to promote international trade and representatives of Chinese companies.
Right, Professor Kalichnova, we had to move on to the next agenda on this discussion. That is the upcoming 2017 Astana World Expo. Professor Zhang, what do you see this importance attached by both countries to renewable energy and new energy?
Between two economies, just before I mentioned that actually Kazakhstan is one of the most innovative economy in Central Asia. If you look at those ranking places organized provided by Switzerland, actually Kazakhstan could be ranking within 50 economies in the world. That means Kazakhstan has a lot of very qualified human resources with higher education. From Chinese side, we also hope to promote renewable innovation economy. So renewable energy and cleaner energy, that would be very important fields.
So that's the future.
Yeah, that's
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Professor Zhang Jinping from the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, MOFCOM, and Professor Elena Kalichnova from University of Reading. China and Kazakhstan are two countries working closely in various fields, including industrial cooperation, which will boost Kazakhstan's industrialization. Astana is facing a tipping point in its economic transformation. Dovetailed with China's Belt and Road Connectivity proposal, Kazakhstan's Bright Road Initiative should make the most of Eurasian integration and drive its economic performance forward. Meanwhile, cooperation between the two sides, especially growing people-to-people exchanges, will diversify Kazakhstan's domestic economy and its global trade. The strategic partnership between the two sides will also set a good example for China's partnership with other Belt and Road countries. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has realized this and has shown Tokyo's interest in the Belt and Road Initiative. The initiative itself, above all, is about building a community of shared interests and a shared future for the benefit of all. You're watching The Point. Stay with us.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all.
The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
You're watching The Point. California-based technology company Uber has drawn intense criticism from Londoners. Users have accused the ride-hailing app of trying to profit from a surge in prices around the London Bridge area in the aftermath of the terror attacks recently. Social media erupted immediately, with a furious Twitter user calling the app lower than low when its prices doubled after the attack. The company responded to the claims the next day, saying they suspended surging prices as soon as they heard of the attack, saying the price automatically increases during rush hours and at times of heavy demand. So is it excusable, or is it a surge pricing system even fair to its users? Meanwhile, the company is also facing rulings by the Court of Justice of the EU. A senior official of the court suggested that Uber is not an internet company, but really a transport company that requires a license to operate. If that argument is agreed by the court, it will be a major setback for Uber. Joining me from Paris to talk about this international ride-hailing business is Professor Joao Toko at the American Graduate School of Diplomacy, and in Beijing, Mr. Xu Qingduo, a current affairs commentator. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. I'd like to start with the basics of capitalism, since this issue was raised from a capitalist market, that is the United Kingdom. Is it simply demand and supply, Mr. Xu Qingduo?
Well, in a sense, it is like a supply and demand. By bringing in the drivers, usually they are not professional drivers, to the demand of the general public who are looking for a lift. That is supply and demand in this sense. But of course, for every company, even you are like Uber, you call it like internet-based company or just a transport system, transport company. It also has a corporate responsibility, social responsibility. And sometimes it is, very controversial.
Well, what's your take, Professor Toko?
Well, I would say that if you look at the matter in a way of a dossier you examine in sort of a managerial meeting, then indeed we are speaking about supply and demand. But everything in this issue indeed indicates to the fact that we are not speaking about it. We're speaking about common sense under, sure enough, dramatic and extreme circumstances. So we are used to deal with those machines, with those devices, with those new media and new technology. I would just bluntly say that here we have an issue which is directly that of a new common sense. I mean, and indeed, my colleague in Beijing indicated very well that we are speaking about social responsibility, or if you wish, political responsibility, political in the noble sense, of business companies and business actors. They are also part of our societies, and when it comes to extreme circumstances such as terror attacks, of course, other rules should be applied other than those of the machines which just regulate supply and demand.
So what exactly is Uber's business model, Professor Toko? Because Uber was a focal point in France. It actually literally raised some riots and attacks directly on the company's cars.
That's correct. There has been, and there still is, all kind of multi-partners battle when it comes to traditional taxi companies, when it comes to Uber, when it comes to Hitch, when it comes to about half a dozen other companies. And this conflict is not proper to France. Similar conflicts have been taken in Scandinavian countries, in Italy, in China, as we know, and things seem to be clearing up just recently because Uber was not allowed, as you know better than me, in Beijing to operate the same way in China, and there's the Didi application there, which will be is and will be doing running services which are somehow similar to Uber. This is the way this new technology and this new devices are finding their spotting positions within the business models of, if you wish, a larger transportation. But this is the purely commercial issue. We are speaking here about something when it comes to the issue of what happened in London last Saturday over these 42 minutes in which the machine, between 20:08 p.m. and 22:50 p.m., namely 42 minutes in which the machines did their work and Uber drivers were charging extraordinary prices for those who were trying just to escape from the terror spot. We're speaking about something completely different, which one way or the other will join the domestication, let's call it, of new technologies in our new modern way of consuming and operating economically.
Well, Mr. Xu, actually Uber offered free rides after the Manchester attack. Why was there such a delay in response to the London attack? Do you think Uber actually created a perfect storm for itself?
Well, I think, there's, as we said, the automatic increase, so-called surge pricing. It's an automatic system, and I think it works, obviously, when there's a heavy demand over the weekend or in the peak hours, like in New Year's Eve. There's a heavy demand, there are fewer cars, of course, the prices usually will go up. That's understandable. But at the same time, of course, the problem here is like they responded obviously in a very not timely manner. That's why people are not happy with that. And the least you can do is keep the flat price instead of increasing price at such a time when there's a tragic event that's taking place and everybody was scared. And of course, free ride is welcome, but at least what you can do is not increase the price. That's why probably Uber offered in the later, the second day, basically to refund the ride fare to those people who are from those affected area and central London, and also offer donation to Red Cross. This is, of course, in the crisis management. Hopefully, they can learn something from this.
So, Mr. Xu, I'd like to follow up on that. So, when it comes to emergencies, do you see a common practice that is actually very practical for all the ride-hailing platforms?
Well, I think so. I think, if it's emergency, of course, it depends on the situation. I think if it is emergency situation, not only the, ride-hailing service, but also regular taxi drivers, but also buses, probably even private cars should be encouraged to offer the service, whether it's free, whether it's, charged fairly and with a fair price, because it's an emergency situation. But again, it is really about coordination. It's really about the concerted efforts. Probably the government at this time should play a major role in organizing all the resources to deal with this emergency situation.
Right, Professor Toko, do you agree that the government should play a leading role in organizing a code of conduct or a common practice for all the similar services in case of emergencies?
Yes, I think government should have a role. I think government should have a role on the larger sense, the sense which, if you wish to theorize on that, would be that, who's dominating whom? Technologies, do they dominate the way we live in a way which will just let it happen? Or is it that there are vectors, powers, actors such as government, such as others perhaps? I offered just common sense a few minutes ago, which seems to be, under these circumstances, to be so much more logical. But one should look at it, beyond the cynical suspicions of what happened over these 42 minutes during which Uber surged higher prices right after over the first 32 minutes after the terrorist attack in London. I don't believe that even in utmost capitalist, cynical markets, such as the British one or the West European one, people were just cold-bloodedly trying to make more money over these extreme terrorist violent circumstances. I think that it was Saturday evening, late at night, there was no human intervention over these machines, which are automatically settled to create the balance between those supply and demand factors in normal times. If there were to be a human intervention, it would have been done more rapidly, and we saw
well,
that.
Professor, talking about human intervention, I'm afraid Uber is right now having more crises at hand. Let's talk about this EU investigation into the nature of this company. Do you think it's actually a transportation company or an internet service?
I think it's both. And this is precisely why those new technologies and new media create new problems for us in order to perceive what is it, what kind of actors, what kind of vectors are there in the economic reality, and what are the new relations between those new technologies and new devices and the way human individuals are being served by them, and of course all the economic opportunities which could be which could give some territory to some abuse. This is precisely what law, government and public affairs are supposed to do in these new times.
All right, Mr. Xu, Uber failed in China, not due to this argument about its nature, but a failure of business operation. What's your take?
Well, I think, Uber not only failed in China, but also failed in Hungary and in Brazil. So it's not unique in China. But of course, China is very different from, say, the mother country, the United States, California, in terms of political culture, in terms of economic culture, and also the tradition itself. So it's a different market. And usually you need a local partner to navigate all those complexities. Obviously, Uber did it by themselves. This is part of the reason, probably, why they failed.
So you think localization is also very important in the age of globalization? Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Joao Toko at the American Graduate School of Diplomacy and Mr. Xu Qingduo here in Beijing. Uber and other ride-hailing apps have found favor around the world as a result of dissatisfaction with established taxi firms who many feel charge too much or are hard to flag down, have rude drivers, as well as many other criticisms. The fact that you know in advance of getting into your Uber cab how much your ride is going to cost, irrespective of whether the car is stuck in a traffic jam or not, while also knowing that the price is likely to be a lot lower than that of an established taxi, has made such apps a mushroom in recent years. On downside, some complain of harassment from drivers, and the fact that the drivers are not licensed by the local authority makes many feel uncomfortable in their apparent lack of accountability. While one might feel sympathy with established taxi drivers who feel that they are getting unfair competition from the low-priced ride-hailing app drivers, it's, after all, simply a question of market forces that have ensured the success of these apps in recent years. Thanks for watching. As always, follow The Point on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle @ThePointWithLiuXing. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. I hope you will join us again tomorrow.